She took one bite, looked up, and said, "Your food is loud like your personality, tacky and confused." Everyone laughed. Everyone, including my husband. That was the moment I realized I hadn't married a man. I'd married into an institution, and I was its lowest-ranking staff. They didn't want my love. They wanted my silence, dressed in designer, smiling with closed lips. That night, while they drank champagne, I scrubbed dishes with tears running into the soap. They thought they'd humiliated me. They didn't know they'd just seasoned the most dangerous recipe of my life. They called it tradition. I called it erasure. Every morning in the Vaughn household began with rituals disguised as routines. Smile at Lucinda before she speaks, wear muted tones at breakfast, never interrupt Edward when he reads the paper, and most importantly, never mention my past life as a chef. My knives stayed boxed under the bed, next to my culinary degree and a Michelin offer letter I never answered. 3 years into marriage, I had become the woman Lucinda sculpted, a beautiful silence carved to fit the frame of their family portrait. The Vaughns ran in circles where conversation wasn't about curiosity, but confirmation of status. Dinner guests spoke in hushed accents about Tuscany, equity firms, and curated suffering in Bali. I learned to nod in the right places, laugh when someone mocked their maid's cooking, and hide the way my hands ached to be in a kitchen. Every comment Lucinda made was a velvet-coated dagger. "You're quite lucky," she once told me, folding her napkin. "Most girls from modest backgrounds don't end up in a place like this." Her smile was always razor-thin. What stung most wasn't her contempt. It was Edward's indifference. He wasn't cruel. He was worse. He was absent in moments that demanded presence. When Lucinda asked why I'd never put that culinary hobby to rest, he chuckled and said, "She likes to pretend it mattered." No one noticed the silence that followed, except me. The last time I held a knife professionally was the week before the wedding. A major investor offered me a chance to open a restaurant in Charleston. I hesitated, asked for a weekend to think. That Friday, Lucinda invited me to a welcome to the family lunch. After dessert, she casually said the investor had pulled out. "These things happen," she said. I never told anyone, but something in her tone, too knowing, too smug, told me it hadn't just happened. Years later, I confirmed what I already knew. She made one phone call. That was all it took to erase the door I almost walked through. The breaking point came dressed as civility. The Vaughn's Winter Gala was the event of the season. 200 guests, black tie, crystal chandeliers that hummed when you breathed too hard. Lucinda had planned every detail, down to the angle of the champagne flutes. 3 days before the event, she approached me at breakfast and said, "You could contribute a dish, just something simple, nothing ambitious." I nodded. I spent the next 72 hours perfecting a dish that meant everything to me. It was a reinterpretation of my mother's lentil stew, a comfort meal turned haute cuisine. I infused it with black garlic, rosemary oil pearls, and a saffron foam that vanished like memory. I plated each bowl like an offering. When I brought it to the servers, Lucinda gave me a look I couldn't quite decode. At dinner, the guests murmured with interest when the dish was announced. A few even complimented it, softly, as if afraid it wasn't trendy enough. Then Lucinda picked up her spoon. She took a bite, chewed thoughtfully, set it down, and turned to the table. "It's interesting," she said, loud enough for the chandelier to catch it, "how peasant flavors can be, elevated, even charming in a farm-to-table sort of way." Laughter trickled around the table. Edward didn't say a word. He didn't even look at me. My face burned, but I smiled, the way I'd been trained. Later that night, I cleared the empty bowls myself. No one noticed. The servers assumed I was staff. I didn't correct them. I went back into the kitchen, washed my hands, then sat in the pantry beside the spice rack and cried. Quiet, so quiet the time couldn't hear. That was the night I stopped asking for space. I stopped waiting for Edward to defend me, or Lucinda to change, or anyone to see me. They didn't have to. I saw myself, and I was done being invisible. I left while they were sleeping, just after midnight, when the snowfall turned the world to hush. No grand declaration, no note on the table. Just one suitcase, my mother's recipe journal wrapped in a scarf, and a chef's knife so worn the wood handle had a name carved in it. Mine. Hannah. I didn't even take my wedding ring. It had never felt like mine anyway. The frost bit my skin as I waited for the bus at the edge of the Vaughn's estate, a property so vast it had its own zip code. I sat on a bench meant for gardeners, not wives, and felt the cold sink into my spine like truth. The tabloids would say I ran after a failed party dish. They'd call it impulsive. The daughter-in-law who cracked under pressure. A flair for the dramatic. But I wasn't running. I was walking away from a cage so well decorated, no one noticed the bars. 2 days later, headlines bloomed like poison ivy. Culinary heiress abandons Vaughn dynasty. Last Supper, diner disaster sparks divorce rumors. I read none of it. I stayed in a studio apartment above a bakery in a quiet part of town where no one knew my name. The owner, an old woman with cloudy eyes, gave me a discount on rent in exchange for washing dishes and baking early mornings. It was the first honest trade I'd made in years. I didn't post on social media. I didn't reach out to friends. I didn't justify. My silence wasn't weakness. It was intention. Every day, I reread my mother's notes, annotated with flour smudges and little doodles in the margins. Recipes for stew and resilience. Dishes she cooked during chemo, meals that said, "I love you" without speaking. That journal held more legacy than the Vaughn's entire lineage. At night, I planned. The concept came to me in fragments, flashes of memories tied to flavors, how scent and taste were keys to locked doors in the mind. I didn't want to cook for applause anymore. I wanted to cook for awakening. I found a commercial kitchen for rent by the hour. No dining area, no signage, just stainless steel and silence. From there, I launched an invitation-only experiment. No menu, no branding. Just a single sentence sent to a curated list of people I'd once cooked for or known. Tell me a memory you want to feel again. The brave ones responded. One woman wrote, "The smell of my grandmother's apron." Another said, "The stew my father made the day my dog died." A man asked for whatever reminded him of a home he'd never actually had. I took each story, read it like scripture, and built dishes that tasted like nostalgia, grief, or unspoken love. I didn't cook with trends or ingredients du jour. I cooked with empathy. I didn't serve in porcelain or post photos. I plated on slate, wrapped in cloth, and left them in delivery bags with handwritten notes. I called it Dish Memory. Privately, to myself. Orders spread by whispers. Word of mouth. Encrypted emails, referrals passed like secrets. There was no public access. Each delivery came with a small request. If you post about this, don't name me. Describe the feeling. Some honored it. Some couldn't help themselves. One day, a mid-tier TikToker ordered a meal titled Grief with Honey. He uploaded a video of himself crying while eating the dish, describing how it reminded him of his mother's warm kitchen after her funeral. "I didn't know food could remember things I forgot," he whispered to the camera. The clip went viral, 8.2 million views in 3 days. My inbox flooded. Still, I stayed invisible. Interviews were requested. TV producers sent DMs offering exposure. Influencers begged for invites. I said nothing. The allure of the ghost chef only intensified. They began calling me the Culinary Phantom, a brand built on mystery but rooted in memory. I was finally feeding people, not their ego, but their inner child, their broken parts, their buried joy. Meanwhile, Lucinda's circle whispered. I knew she'd seen the video. The Vaughns had always tracked anything remotely relevant to their name. She'd recognized the plating style, the cadence of my notes. I wondered how it tasted in her mouth, the knowing, that she hadn't broken me, that I'd left and built something she couldn't buy, brand or bury. But I wasn't seeking revenge. Not yet. What I was building couldn't be fought with lawyers or press releases. It was quiet, viral, inescapable. Because it wasn't about me. It was about them, the eaters, the seekers, the wounded who found themselves again in a bite. One day, I delivered a meal called Safe Laughter to a woman in hospice. She passed away that night. Her daughter messaged me later. She said it tasted like the night Dad proposed. Thank you. I printed that message, folded it into my mother's journal. That was my Michelin star. They never saw me coming because I never walked in through the front door. I built a tunnel. One spoonful at a time. The shift began quietly, not with fanfare or branding campaigns, but with a name whispered in closed circles. Table of Memory. It wasn't a restaurant. It wasn't even a place. It was an experience, and each one was ephemeral, designed, served, and vanished within hours. No repeats, no reservations, no press invites, just one guest, one memory, one meal. It started with a former psychologist who had once counseled trauma patients. He requested a dish that felt like relief after a confession. I spent days researching flavors tied to catharsis, bitterness softened by heat, textures that dissolved slowly. I created a consommé infused with smoked pear and thyme oil, served in a hollowed-out stone bowl warmed by candle wax. The man wept after the third spoonful. I felt like someone finally listened, he said. He posted anonymously on a private forum. That post was copied, shared, dissected, and craved. From there, the myth grew. Table of Memory became a coded invitation. I sent handwritten cards with no return address, no instructions, only a time, a place, and a request. Bring one memory you wish to revisit. The table was always different. Sometimes a rooftop, sometimes an abandoned greenhouse, once even a boat drifting down a river. I chose the location based on the emotional tone of the dish. Each guest was served by me directly, though they never saw my face. I wore gloves, kept my hair covered, and never spoke during service. But the food did, loudly. One woman said the risotto I made for her tasted like my father tucking me in after a nightmare. A man who'd grown up in a refugee camp called my spiced tea the safest thing I've ever held. Each review came not in stars, but in essays. Writers, artists, and therapists began referring clients. I wasn't just feeding the stomach. I was excavating emotional ruins and plating them. The media couldn't keep up. Who is the ghost chef? Headlines asked. Food as therapy or manipulation? The dish that broke a billionaire. Everyone wanted to unmask me. No one could. Until Lucinda did. She hadn't moved on, not really. The Vaughns may have filled the press with stories of expansion, partnerships, and philanthropic initiatives. But Lucinda was a control freak, and the one thing she couldn't control was me, that gnawed at her like rot beneath marble floors. Through private investigators and whisper networks, she traced the style, the motifs, the ingredients, and then she saw it, a dish served at a Table of Memory session that mirrored one I'd made at the Vaughn estate. Only better, more precise. My voice, fully realized. She didn't come for me directly. Instead, I received a cease and desist from a high-powered law firm. The letter accused the anonymous culinary entity of copyright infringement, claiming I had stolen family Vaughn heirloom recipes. I laughed. For the first time in years, I laughed so hard my stomach ached, because she didn't know. 5 years ago, before I married Edward, before Lucinda made me pack away my knives, I had copyrighted every recipe I ever created, under my mother's name. At the time, it felt sentimental. Now it was warfare. I responded not with a lawyer, but with a public upload. A single PDF document titled Legacy Dated and Sealed. Inside, original drafts, dates, timestamps, signed statements from mentors and test kitchen collaborators, all proving the recipes Lucinda claimed as family heritage were mine, legally, creatively, emotionally. Within hours, food critics picked it up. Financial blogs analyzed the implications. Investors began asking uncomfortable questions at Vaughan Hospitality board meetings. If you built your brand on stolen innovation, what else isn't real? Stock dipped. Lucinda went silent. Meanwhile, my inbox exploded. Venture capitalists sent offers, some veiled as admiration, others as desperation. The name Beyond Palate started trending on founder forums. They saw what I built as scalable, a fusion of neuroscience, gastronomy, and memory, experience design disguised as cuisine. One group offered $18 million to license the table of memory concept globally. I declined. I wasn't done building. But I made one strategic move. I opened one flagship space. Invite only, yes, but permanent. A gallery-style dining room with no menu. Guests filled out a memory intake form 2 weeks prior. When they arrived, their meal was waiting. No cameras, no phones, no names spoken, only taste. It became the most exclusive meal on the continent. Lucinda tried to retaliate again, this time with a press release claiming inspiration and family lineage. But the public had changed. They didn't believe her. They saw through the veneers. One tweet captured it best. She married a ghost, buried her light, and now eats her dust. I didn't celebrate. I didn't dance on graves. I simply booked another table of memory, this time for myself. The form I filled out read, "The taste of believing in myself for the first time." Lucinda Vaughan had always been a strategist. She didn't panic. She pivoted. When the legal backlash failed, she shifted tactics. A month after my flagship space made headlines, her team announced the grand opening of Emotion Eaters, a fine dining concept built, she claimed, on the intersection of neuroscience and nostalgia. Sound familiar? The branding was coldly perfect. Chromed interiors, minimalist plating, dishes named after emotions like joy, regret, first love. The PR campaign leaned heavily on phrases like unlocking edible memory and taste-driven therapy. The media, hungry for the next viral dining experience, lapped it up. Interviews, magazine covers, talk show appearances. Lucinda was back in the spotlight, this time as a culinary visionary. But there was one problem. She didn't understand the soul of it. Emotion Eaters looked right, but it felt wrong. The meals were algorithmic. Guests filled out forms, AI-generated dish profiles, and chefs, hired for precision, not intuition, assembled plates like machines. Lucinda had replicated the concept, but not the essence. She'd copied the structure, stripped the spirit, and called it innovation. Critics were divided. Some raved, others hesitated. A few whispered what many thought. It's stunning. But I didn't feel anything. I didn't respond publicly. I let her keep the stage, because I had something she couldn't replicate: intimacy. 2 weeks after her launch, I sent private invitations to 5 individuals from a local neurology clinic, patients with early to mid-stage memory loss. They weren't celebrities or influencers, just people fading from their own lives. The dining room was dimly lit, each table dressed in soft cotton linens and surrounded by photographs they didn't remember taking. Family provided the stories, the memories, the scents that once brought joy. I built dishes not from recipes but from lives. The tang of summer tomatoes, the musk of father's cologne in stew, the sugar crust on birthday peaches. One man, a retired jazz musician, took a bite of chili and froze. His eyes welled up. "My wife," he whispered. "She used to make this every Sunday." He began humming a tune no one had heard in years. His son, watching from the corner, fell apart in silence. A nurse filmed the moment, not as content but as proof of progress. The clip went viral anyway. 23 million views in 4 days. Headlines read, "Memory returned through flavor." Articles debated whether food could be more effective than pharmaceuticals. My name remained absent, but the world now saw the difference between experience and exploitation. Lucinda's empire started to buckle. Then came the article. An international culinary journal published an exposé, The Stolen Recipes of Lucinda Vaughn. Inside were testimonies from over a dozen chefs, interns, and collaborators who claim Lucinda had used, erased, and repackaged their ideas over the years. Some stories stretch back decades, others were recent, young minds she mentored, only to later dismiss and overshadow. Emails, contracts, and voice memos were leaked. Her signature phrase, "Consider it a collaboration," it became a punchline for theft. Investors pulled out. PR firms dropped her. Guests canceled reservations. Emotion Eater's stock valuation plunged. That's when Edward reached out. He called from an unknown number. His voice trembled, not from fear, but from the erosion of entitlement. "She's falling apart," he said. "The board wants to remove her. The press is circling like sharks." I didn't reply. He added, "She won't survive this. You know how much her name means to her." I let the silence hang. "I'm not asking you to lie. Just help her frame a statement. Guide the narrative. Give her a soft landing." It was absurd, but also familiar. How many times had I been asked to cushion someone else's damage? I said yes, not because I owed her grace, but because I was ready to serve the truth. The press conference was scheduled at the original Vaughn estate, the same ballroom where my dish had once been ridiculed. Cameras filled the room. Lucinda sat beside Edward, pale and sharp as ever, her designer suit unable to hide the cracks beneath. They expected a carefully managed statement, a rebranding of failure into humility. Instead, I walked onto the stage and placed 5 covered plates on the table. One by one, I unveiled them, each dish representing a person whose voice Lucinda had stolen, each recipe accompanied by a printed story of theft, of erasure, of dreams crushed under her heel. Then I turned to the cameras. "For years, I cooked in silence," I said. "I let others take credit for flavors born of my grief, my joy, my history. I thought being quiet meant being strong. But silence isn't strength, it's suffocation." I looked directly at Lucinda. I was taught that truth must be palatable to be accepted, so today I cooked it, and whether you swallow it or choke, that's up to you. Gasps filled the room. Lucinda didn't move. Edward tried to speak, but the mics were cut. I left before the applause. Outside, snow began to fall again, soft and slow, as if the world was erasing its own tracks. I walked into it, coat unbuttoned, face bare, breath steady. For the first time, I didn't feel hunted. I felt full. The offer came wrapped in elegance, just like everything else in the world I once tried to belong to. A Swiss-based hospitality conglomerate sent a delegation to my flagship space. They didn't speak in hyperbole or pitch decks. They spoke in language I understood now. Reverence, preservation, legacy. They wanted to buy everything. My entire system, the table of memory methodology, the emotion-based menu design process, the sensory algorithms I'd refined. Not to gut it, not to rebrand it, but to scale it across continents. "We don't want to own your vision," the lead negotiator said. "We want to extend it." It was the first time anyone with money said they'd follow, not lead. The number was staggering, $43 million, but I didn't say yes because of the money. I said yes because of the clause I wrote into the deal. Every dish served under my concept would retain its integrity. No substitutions, no dilution, no performative plating. The soul of the experience, the memory restoration, the emotional anchoring, the personal intake process had to remain untouched, and it would. I signed the papers on a rainy Thursday morning. No champagne, no headlines, just a quiet nod to the woman I used to be, the one who cried into a sink of dirty dishes while others laughed at her. But I didn't walk away entirely. I kept one piece, a small center in a quiet neighborhood, far from luxury. The doors bore no name, just a simple symbol of a spoon cradling a flame. It was a sensory rehabilitation clinic designed for people who had lost more than their appetite. veterans with PTSD, survivors of trauma, stroke patients relearning what joy tastes like, children who never had safe food memories to begin with. We called it the Flame Table. I cooked there a few times a week. No cameras, no reviews, just presence. And then, one evening in December, she came. Lucinda arrived without warning, without a press entourage, without Edward. The receptionist didn't recognize her, but I did. Her face had changed, less painted, more pale. Her posture still carried that posture of a woman who refused to ask for anything. But this time, she didn't need to. She sat at the farthest table and filled out the intake card. She wrote only 7 words. Something that tastes like what I regret. I read it twice. In the kitchen, I stood still for several minutes, hands on the counter, staring at nothing. Then I began. I didn't reach for flash or flare. I pulled from a memory that wasn't mine, but might have been hers. A small coastal dish of poached eggs over creamed spinach and sourdough toast, a style common in the cafes near where Lucinda studied abroad in her 20s. A place she once mentioned fondly, offhandedly, when she'd allowed herself to be human for a brief second. I made it as if that memory had belonged to me. No garnish, no narrative, just warmth, texture, and restraint. I served it myself. She looked up. Our eyes met. For a moment, I saw her as someone's daughter. Someone who had once tried to matter in a world that only rewarded domination. Someone who built a kingdom so high she forgot the kitchen table. She ate in silence. Halfway through, her eyes filled, not with spectacle, but with something closer to collapse. She didn't sob, just let the tears fall, quietly, like someone surrendering to the fact that they could no longer pretend. When the plate was clean, she stood. She didn't say thank you. She didn't apologize. She only whispered, "You made something I thought I'd lost." Then she left. I didn't follow her. I didn't need her to kneel or beg or even admit anything. Her presence here was enough. Her eating that dish in a place I built under my terms by my hands was the clearest confession she could give. And I, in turn, offered no absolution, only nourishment. That night, I sat alone in the dining room after closing. The staff had gone. The lights were dim. The silence felt earned. I thought about everything I had given up: titles, proximity to power, a last name meant to impress, and everything I had gained: sovereignty, impact, peace. Lucinda Vaughn had once told me that refinement was knowing what to subtract. She was wrong. Refinement is knowing what never needed their approval in the first place. They didn't call me chef anymore. Not at the Institute. There, I was introduced simply as Hannah Rhodes. Lecturer, mentor, researcher. The title didn't matter. What mattered was that the room listened differently. Not with expectation, but with openness. The Institute of Applied Emotional Studies had a wing dedicated to multisensory healing. They'd invited me not just to teach, but to build a curriculum, one that used food as a medium of recall, of repair. I walked students through memory-anchored flavor mapping, cross-sensory integration, and the neuroscience of nostalgia. Most had never worked in a kitchen. Some had never cooked at all, but every single one had a story that shaped the way they tasted the world. A girl from Seoul who remembered the sound of rice crackling on her grandmother's stove. A man from Nairobi who hadn't smelled cloves since his mother's funeral. An autistic teenager who never liked being touched, but found that the scent of honey made him feel held. One afternoon during open seminar, a student raised his hand. He was shy, precise in the way he spoke, as if afraid his question would cut too deeply. "Have you ever cooked something," he asked, "that hurt someone?" The room stilled. I didn't answer right away. I looked out the window for a moment, watching sunlight drift across the herb garden outside. Then I turned back to him. "I used to cook to defend myself," I said. "Every dish was a weapon disguised as hospitality. I wanted people to taste their guilt, their cruelty, their underestimation. And they did. But it didn't free me." I paused. "Now, I cook so people don't have to defend themselves at all." He nodded slowly, like someone tasting an idea for the first time. After class, I walked the halls alone. The institute walls were painted in muted colors, pale green, soft gray, calm without sterility. In the lobby, a display case held artifacts from global culinary history. A cracked clay pot from northern India, a bamboo rice basket from Laos, an oil-stained apron from Tuscany. I had contributed something too, a spoon, just a simple wooden spoon once carved by my mother when we had nothing but beans and hope. I passed it without touching it. Some things are more powerful left still. At home that night, I returned to a manuscript I'd been working on for years. It wasn't a cookbook. There were no measurements, no ingredient lists, just memories, fragments, emotions tied to scent, to sound, to hunger, not just of the body, but of the soul. The first chapter was titled, "Bitterness Can Be Beautiful." Another chapter, "Salt is What Brings Tears and Taste Together." The book was called "What We Never Forgot." And the final page, a single prompt, "Cook the thing you dreamed of tasting but never did." That was it. No explanation, no photos, because healing is never prescriptive. It's invited. When the book was published, it didn't trend. It rippled. Readers began posting their own dishes, messy, imperfect, unapologetically personal. Some looked like art, others like childhood. They tagged me, not for attention, but as a kind of thank you. One man simply wrote, "I made my father's silence into soup. It tasted like closure." Eventually, the book reached people I never expected. Letters came in from prisons, from elder care homes, from refugee camps. One note read, "I read your chapter on forgiveness while stirring lentils. I cried so hard I burned the pot. It still tasted like peace." I didn't respond to every message, but I read them all. One evening, after a long day of teaching, I sat down at my kitchen table. It was small, wooden, scarred with years of use. I placed a single plate in front of me, a dish I hadn't named, hadn't served to anyone else. Just something that reminded me of the night my mother hummed while peeling potatoes. After a day she couldn't afford bread, but still told me stories with a smile. The food wasn't pretty, but it was honest. And as I took a bite, I realized I wasn't feeding pain anymore. I was feeding possibility. I had nothing left to prove, nothing left to reclaim, only something left to pass on. Outside, the world continued, loud, hungry, restless. But in that moment, the silence was full, and I remembered what it meant to be home. Sometimes, silence is the loudest revenge. The camera fades, the last frame lingers on the table, a dish with no name, and a single unanswered question. Do you remember the first flavor you ever believed was home?